So assuming that you do have the countdown timer class set up, because you've been working on it for quite a bit now, and let's say I'm going to create a project, a package name project 1, and just click finish. So you do have the setup of your instance variables and constructors. So all of them, right? How do you include a JUnit testing in your project? So then you will go to the project again, and you will right click, and you will say new. You want to select JUnit test case, and for now I'm just going to use a dummy name, because we are not going to use this file. We're going to use the sample test cases from that you can download from Blackboard, and make sure that you are using JUnit 4. Okay, so make sure that the radio button up here is on JUnit 4, and we just say finish. Okay, and then perform the following action, because we have to include the JUnit jar file into your Eclipse project. And okay, so now we do have one dummy test file, but the important part of the setup is make sure that you see JUnit 4 in your project Explorer. Now I can copy my file, my test cases. So you download the test cases from Blackboard, and I do have one copy in my folder. This is the file that I want to drag into my project. So you can do the same on Windows. So basically drag that here into my project. Okay, and I want to copy my file, and click OK, and now you have a new file, part of your project. And if the project name doesn't match, then you will see an error. Yep, because what I did before, I created a package project 1, but the package name inside the file is package 1. So I need to match them, either by changing this to project 1 or changing my project name to a package name to package 1. So it's up to you. I'm going to change the package name to project 1. Okay. And of course, because my implementation of countdown timer is incomplete, I have only one. Now I can safely remove my dummy Java file. So I do have only one constructor, but as you can see from here, the test file expects to see more constructors, so I don't have that. And Eclipse has a nice feature of automatically generating missing methods. So if you just hover your mouse over the error, and there is one option to quick fix, and if you select the third one, create constructor, and it will create a constructor for you. And of course, I'm going to rename the parameter to something more meaningful, and I'm going to use H, M, and S for hour, minutes, and second. Okay, so now that error is gone, and then you can just repeat the step, create constructor again, and that constructor takes a string input, and then just Control S. And if you just want to jump to the next error, just click the red box on the right margin, and you can just repeat the same step, and then hover your mouse, and then create method, and then I'm going to rename the parameter to a more meaningful name. Instead of using I, I'm going to name it number of seconds, and you can do the same for the rest. Okay, and then create method, and save. Make sure that the error disappeared, and then more, and then create method, and I will do for all of them. And then jump to the next error, and then compare to, hover your mouse, and then create method, and let me call it other. Okay, save, Control S, and continue to the next one, create method, and I'm going to rename the parameter to file name. And then the last one is down here, load, and then I'm going to rename the incoming parameter to file name. Okay, so no error, hopefully. Yep, all red markers are gone, so then no error. But of course, our test case is incomplete, right? So now, how do I write more test cases? So in JUnit, whenever you want to test something, you have to write a method, and that method must be prefixed with the annotation @test. Okay? So without @test, your method is not going to be considered as a test method. And let's say, so we give you some examples in here. Let me zoom it in. So for methods, for test cases, for test method that require no exception to be thrown, you will just use the @test tag at the beginning of your method. But when your method expects to get an exception, then you have to write the header differently, a little bit differently. So you have to say @test expected equals whatever the exception type that will be expected when you run the test case. So for this example here, you try to initialize countdown timer using 5 hours, 5 minutes, and 300 seconds. Of course, that number is invalid, right? Because 300 is too big, okay? And for that case, your constructor should throw an exception, illegal argument exception. So that's how you write test cases that expects an exception to be thrown. And the difference between a regular test method, test case, with the one that will throw an exception, you cannot write more than one in a test case that expects exception. So that's why here we do have only one line. But for other methods, you may write longer logic. Okay? Question about the general design of your test cases. Okay? So now let me show you one example. Well, before I show you one example, then you can see like in many places in our test cases, you will see the method assert equals. And so far, the only one we have here is just assert equals, and we do have assert false. Okay, and of course you have to know which method to use in your test case, depending on your method that you're testing. So let's compare the toString, right? So then the toString, we know that a toString will return a string, and you want to compare that the return of the toString from S1 is exactly that string 4:56:55. Okay, so because we want to make sure that the expected output is the same as the actual output. So when you write assert call, the first parameter is the expected output, and the second parameter is the actual output. Okay, so we want to make sure that the expected is the same as the actual output, and that's why you have to use assert equals. Okay, but for methods like equals, you know that equals will return a Boolean true or false. Then instead of using assert equals, then you will say assert false or assert true. Okay, but I can also write my assert call for Boolean methods using assert equals. Okay, I just show you the power of auto completion in Eclipse, and if you don't remember for sure what method to use, I just type assert E and then I just press Control Space, and Control Space will give me options what method that I can call from Eclipse. And I'm going to show you how to use assert equals for Boolean. So the hint tells you that the first parameter is the expected outcome, and the next parameter is the actual outcome, right? So now if I do want to replace my assert false with assert equals, then I'm going to write something like this. Okay? So, question. So now let me write a new method that will check what method that we don't check yet in here. Can anybody suggest one? Okay, let's say I'm going to write a test case when the timer is initialized to 5 seconds, and then I'm going to attempt to subtract 10 seconds out of my timer. What will happen? So a timer is initialized to only 5 seconds, but then I'm going to attempt to subtract 10 seconds out of my timer. What do I expect to see here? -5, and in that case, your subtract should throw an exception, right? Okay, throw an exception. So how do I set up that test case? So I'm going to write one here. So because this is a test case that will expect to get an exception, then I'm going to use the expected keyword. Expected equals illegal argument exception dot class. Oh, I'm missing a name. So all test case has to be a void method with no parameter. Okay, let me call it subtract too much. Okay, so you can name your method any name, but the format is always public void no parameter. Okay, so how do I set up? Tell me what to write here. I do want to create a timer initialized to 5 seconds only, and then I'm going to subtract 10 seconds out of my timer. Tell me what to write. Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. Apparently we don't have that method yet. We don't have that constructor yet. So we have to create one, right? So I'm going to hover my mouse again. And create method, create constructor with one argument. Hover my mouse, create constructor. Okay, go back to my test case. Okay, and then what? What's next? Okay, like that. I'm making a mistake. Yes. Small timer, I misspelled timer. Okay. Okay? Question about how to write your own test cases? Okay, so I expect you to write lots of test cases for project 1. Okay, the goal is try to break your code. Okay, so make like impossible test cases. So let's say we don't have the example yet, but let's say if you try to do something like this. Okay, invalid number or invalid format in string. Okay, so that test should fail, right? Because the string is not in proper format. So then in that case, I do want to change my test header to say expected illegal argument exception. Illegal argument exception dot class. Okay? Any question about setting up your own test cases? So now, how do you run it? How do you run it? So once you set up your test cases, how do you run? And if I go back to my project panel, so I do want to run the JUnit test case. So just right-click on your test file, and there should be like an option to run as JUnit test. Okay, and that should be easy. And click. And it will prompt you to, I do have Android JUnit installed on my machine. So most likely for you, you're not going to see this dialog. Just use Eclipse JUnit and click OK. And then after a while, if you look at the status bar down here, it is now 87%. It is working. You know the interface of JUnit looks very similar to what you have been using in BlueJ. So you know the way to handle it. So you want to see a green bar up there, right? Okay, any question about running JUnit? So once you make changes to your code, let's say you try to fix one of the errors, and in order to run, you just click one of these two buttons. So you don't have to go back to the project folder, right-click, run as JUnit. You just need to click one of those two buttons. The last topic of my agenda today is about debugging. Okay, let me show you quickly how to set up a breakpoint. So let's say I want to debug. I'm working on one of the methods, let's say, and I want to make a stop at some point. So you know how to set up a breakpoint in BlueJ. You just click the left margin of your editor, right? And then you will set up a breakpoint. So in Eclipse, instead of just clicking the left margin, you do want to right-click the left margin. So let's say I want to make a stop in my test sub. I want to make a stop at line 41. So just right-click, and then you can say toggle breakpoint. Okay, so now you see a blue dot, that's a breakpoint. And if I close my JUnit, and you can either go to your project panel and debug as, instead of selecting run as, you want to use debug as, and you can now debug as a JUnit. So basically everything is the same as before, but now you're debugging instead of running. Now Eclipse will ask your confirmation. You just say OK, and you should be able to inspect your variables from here, and you should be able to look at your current source code. And if I the current line will be highlighted. At this point, we don't have the object S1 instantiated yet. So now the 3 buttons or the 5 buttons up here, these are for debugging. So maybe let me zoom it in so you can see it better. Okay, so this is to resume, and this is to stop, and this is to step into, or you can use F5, and this is to step over, to skip to move to the next instruction, and this is to return from a method. So you can use any one of these buttons here. So 5 buttons altogether. And if I do want to step over, and I need to press F6 or just use that button. So step over, and you will move to the next statement. Now I do have a new object created for me, and of course the initialization is still 0 at this point, and you can just continue.